Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, August 12th, 2015. We're getting into the middle of the month here, and we have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And for all you astronomy buffs out there, quick reminder, tonight is the peak of the Perseids meteor shower. Now, it's actually been going on for a little bit. It lasts for several days on either side. Tonight is the peak, and the early reports are this year's show is actually quite spectacular. Already seeing photos show up on the corporate media and social media, and the best time to see it, unfortunately, is just before dawn tomorrow, but I'm going to be up there with my camera and try and get some pictures from here in Hawaii, and so it's going to be a spectacular show for those of you who are into that kind of science thing here. Before I get into the news, I'm looking at Fox News, and they are absolutely unashamed of their bias against Donald Trump. All morning they've been running all these stories about all the other candidates beside Donald Trump and how great they're doing and how much support they're getting, and all of these experts coming on saying, well, you know, really the fact that Trump is leading the polls doesn't mean anything at all whatsoever. You know, this candidate is really doing much better, and blah, blah, blah. They're still predicting imminent doom for Donald and trying to get him. They've got an impossible task. The GOP leadership wants to kick him out. At the same time, they want to find a way to prevent him from running as a third-party candidate. And those kind of machinations are very obvious. What's going on here? You will vote for the candidate we choose, and you will like it. Sikai. Oh, and by the way, that SRN Newsbreak story about the girl who found the gold bar in the lake near Berchtesgaden Garden, I think we know where that gold came from. Anyway, getting on over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, we're seeing all these reports all over the place, like this one here, Ukraine pushing hard to restart the war in the southeastern region. Reports are coming from the contact line of 100 Ukrainian armored vehicles spotted on the contact line. This is a complete violation of Minsk I and Minsk II. And apparently these vehicles include heavy tanks and 100-millimeter artillery. And it is really cranking up. We are getting reports that Donbass is under heavy artillery barrage coming in from Kiev. General alerts have been sounded in Novorossiya. Basically, everybody's on a war footing all along there. A Russian TV crew came under fire near the Donetsk airport. Still waiting for reports if anybody was killed or wounded. This is the flashpoint. This is where World War III is going to start for real. And everybody in the military-industrial complex is saying, well, it's about time. We've been working for this for decades. Now, Donetsk has opened a criminal case into the arson attack on OSCE cars. Apparently, the OSCE cars were set on fire by somebody who didn't want them going around looking at the damage coming in from Kiev. They caught the arsonists, plural. They're looking at 5 years in jail. And or they know who the arsonists are. They haven't actually quite caught them yet. But they're opening a criminal case. Now, there has been talk over in that part of the world about a Minsk III get-together. Well, Minsk I and II didn't work because Poroshenko won't let them work. Let's try it again and see if that gets any better. It's like the situation over in Illinois, at the University of Urbana-Champaign, where they've got that mumps epidemic among students who've had the mumps vaccine twice, and the suggestion is, well, try it a third time. Maybe that'll work. It's about as valid here for Minsk III. And experts are basically saying that the pitfall here about Minsk III is that the opening requirement for talks of Minsk III is the demand that Minsk II be canceled immediately. In other words, it would now be okay for Poroshenko to just wage unrestricted war on the eastern Ukrainian republics with all of those weapons and supplies that he just got from the United States government, $500 million worth of your money sent into Poroshenko, the king of the chocolatiers, to wage war on the eastern Ukrainian republics for the crime of just wanting to live their own lives without interference. Meanwhile, Russia continues to consistently deliver humanitarian aid to Donbass. They're certainly outperforming all those international aid associations that are trying to get aid into Gaza, following Operation Let's Go Kick Them When They're Down by Israel last summer. And there is a reminder that we really are looking at an attempt by the United States of America to kick up a war with Russia to distract from the crashing economy because they think we will all flock to the flag. We're looking at this article over here in INFOWARS where they're saying the U.S. is plotting a color revolution in Russia. We have seen the indications of it for quite some time. Russia's government knows that's what the U.S. is trying to do. They've started kicking out all of these non-governmental organizations which have proven to be fronts for covert U.S. destabilization in other countries, such as Ukraine. And at this point, it seems that even though the world is picking up on this being the plan, the U.S. is continuing anyway. We've reached a dangerous stage where the U.S. government understands the propaganda has failed and everybody sees exactly what the U.S. is really up to, but they're going to keep on doing it anyway because they're past the point of no return. They have to continue this agenda of world conquest and enslavement to the dollar and petrodollar because they can't turn around and go back without the U.S. economy collapsing. So it's an all-or-nothing deal. Victory or death for other people's children. Seeing another story out of Sputnik News, NATO bracing for possible military conflict with Russia. Everybody is pouring weapons in on either side of the border. And, of course, all we get from the American media is it's all Russia's fault, it's all Russia's fault, it's all Russia's fault. No, it isn't. This is the United States desperately trying to restart the Cold War or a hot war because that's all they can think of doing to get out of this economic mess they've created because it worked the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, let's try it a third time and see if it works as well as those third mump shots are going to work down there at the University of Urbana-Champaign. Now, we posted a link to a flashback story from 1992. And this has to do with a group called the Project for the New American Century, which was supposed to be a truly secret society. Nobody knew about them until they were exposed here in the independent media. And it was a policy group, think tank group, dominated by the neocons and the dual loyalists, who proposed the U.S. going on out in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union and making itself the unrivaled global superpower. And there were some documents from this project that were leaked and made public, and everybody was extraordinarily angry about it because it basically came out. This is when Dick Cheney was defense secretary. And they declared it as the policy of the United States of America of convincing potential competitors that they need not aspire to a greater role or pursue a more aggressive posture to protect their legitimate interests. In other words, the message was, don't even try and protect your natural resources. We're coming to get it, and you're only going to make yourself miserable if you try and stop us. So that is the policy of the U.S. government, global domination going back to 1992 and the Project for the New American Century. And that's why we're in this mess that we're in right now. World War III is underway. The U.S. is the aggressor, the bad guy. I know you don't want to hear that, but it is true. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And while the imperial arrogance of the U.S. government is saying it doesn't matter if people know what we're really doing, we must keep moving forward, the reality is that global perception of the United States has changed dramatically over the last decade, if not earlier than that. And John Kerry is out there expressing concern that Washington, D.C. is starting to lose European Union support for the anti-Russia sanctions, because these sanctions have caused far more economic harm to Europe, the U.S., Canada, South America, than they have to Russia itself. Now, as we reported earlier in the week, the U.S. government was attempting to replay an earlier economic war against the Soviet Union that contributed to collapsing the government of the Soviet Union. And they thought, well, we'll just do it again, and it'll work again, but it didn't, because it's a very different world. For a wide variety of reasons, Russia's economy is much stronger than the Soviet Union's was at the time. It's much more diversified and resilient. And they botched it. Let's call it what it is. These people inside the foreign policy machine of the United States government botched it. They're making decisions based on wishful thinking and past glorious victories, not on a careful analysis of what's going on right in front of them, which is why Putin is going to go on dancing rings around them. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I was about to say, the U.S., I've been researching, the U.S. recently has been, disarming its, nuclear weapons. And also, back in the 90s, Clinton signed something called PDD 60, Presidential Directive Decision 60, where it basically said that, don't prepare to launch a warning, when let's say if there was a nuclear strike coming down, don't be prepared to launch a warning, but absorb that strike. I mean, there's kind of seems signs that the U.S. is sending itself to be absorbed in the nuclear strike.
Well, the problem with that, of course, is where they were talking about absorbing a nuclear strike was here in Hawaii or up in Alaska, because there, frankly, isn't anything the U.S. could do to stop it anyway. But the idea of absorbing the first nuclear strike and then retaliating follows the same thinking that Roosevelt had when he issued an explicit order that in the creation of a war with Japan, that Japan be seen as attacking first in order to rally the support of the American people. And that's what that thinking is right now. The U.S. has decommissioned some of their older nuclear weapons that are past their shelf life, but the materials have been recycled in the development of a whole new generation of tactical nuclear weapons, and the U.S. is building up its nuclear arsenal just as fast as it can. And there is absolutely no question, especially with the release of that Pentagon War Law Manual that says it is now considered acceptable U.S. government policy to use nuclear weapons against states that do not have nuclear arms, which I presume means like Texas or Utah or anybody else that's getting uppity in terms of their relationship with the federal government. But it's not uncommon for the U.S. to try and act like they're the peacemakers, and it turns out to be completely the opposite. And any policy about nuclear deterrence or response, in the age of the computer, it can be changed instantaneously. Now, back when Jonathan Pollard was giving that information to the Russians, it was a big problem, because back then you had to physically go out to the rocket, open up a panel, and change its targeting. Today, it's all run by computers. The password apparently was set to 8 zeros in a row for the convenience of the missile launch crews. And assuming they're not running on Windows Vista or Millennium Edition, it's all controlled by computers, and they can change targeting and policy and yield instantaneously before launch.
But I was reading this article called strategic threat to the coming decade, where this person was saying, laying out the U.S. will induce Russia and China to strike, and then he predicts that it'll just only be military targets, they will try to blackmail the U.S. and then what will the U.S. will respond the leaders will come out the bunker and say we need to join a new world order in order to fight the Russian and Chinese. But he also says
it's entirely possible, whether it's connected with the New World Order or it's connected with the Project for the New American Century. The U.S. government, without a new war, it has lost the trust and faith, support of the American people. We all see them for what they are right now. And because getting into a world war worked before to distract the American people from economic crime, corruption, and politics as usual, they're kind of relying that it's going to work again, that if they can get a big bloody war going with Russia and or China, that we, the American people, will forget all about the abuse of the Bill of Rights, the predations of Wall Street, the sellouts to the vaccine and GMO companies, and will salute the flag smartly and fling what's left of our money and our children's lives onto this week's designated enemies. I don't think it's going to work. The society has changed drastically since the beginning of the age of the Internet. And the tactics and strategies that worked for propaganda back in the 1950s and 1960s don't seem to get much traction these days.
I could send you that article I was reading. Like, it's really long and, like, I don't probably have enough time to explain it, but you could check it out.
Well, I'll check it out. Go ahead and send that along here. And thank you for the phone call. We're going to grab another one here right now. Mike in New York. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, aloha. First-time listener.
Aloha, nui nui.
I actually started listening to your show a couple of days ago. I'm 33 years old, and worried about what's going on in Greece right now. Do you see, I know you're a smart guy, do you see anything happening like that here in the near future, or can we really do something about it? What can we do? And I'll hang up and I'll listen to you soon, man. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Well, the only thing that any country can do to avoid ending up like Greece is shut down the private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. That is the only thing that will really work. Everything else being put out by the financial media or by government, it's just, it's a lie. It's a fraud. It's a deception. They're out there thrashing around, not really changing anything, not really threatening the true power structure and saying, I'm working on the problem. Trust me. Re-elect me to office. Give me your money. I'm working on trying to solve the problem. And, of course, the problem never does get solved, because the problem is that at the very core of the private central bank model is the reality that private central banks that issue the public currency as a loan at interest are creating more debt than money with which to pay the debt. They use that accumulating debt to control society and government until the debt becomes so high it crashes the system, and then the bankers grab all the hard assets, which is what's going on in Greece right now. And yes, it is coming here, unless we stand up to these fraudulent central banks and shut them down. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there's a very interesting article over in Russia Insider drawing parallels between what is going on in Ukraine today and what happened in Serbia 20 years ago, where they had thousands of people killed, driven from their homes by the Croatian army, and they were targeting the Serbs with ethnic cleansing. The U.S. supported this, described the Serbs as invaders, even though they'd been living on that land for centuries. And so we're starting to see again the same exact behavior all over again. We want the land you are on, and we will say bad things about you to convince everybody it is our divine right to take away what used to belong to you, so now it belongs to us. Sometimes I think mankind really has not evolved very much at all from the caveman days. The clubs have gotten better, sadly. But look at our leaders. They're out there pounding their chest and puffing and huffing and grabbing all the females to themselves. They do act like silverbacks, don't they? Another article coming out of Russia Insider, Russia's endgame in Syria. And it lays out an interesting timeline we should be paying attention to. The U.S. know that at the most they only have 6 months left to get Assad out of office. If the Iran deal goes through, and it is going through for all the countries except the United States, Iran is going to start getting back their money that was frozen in all those other countries, and they are going to use part of it to support Assad. In fact, Iran has hopped on to Russia's propaganda bandwagon, calling for an international coalition against ISIS that will be there to get ISIS and will include Assad, which, of course, is exactly the opposite of what the U.S. wants. The U.S. created ISIS to have an excuse to blow up Syria, which is what they've been doing. And now, all of a sudden, Putin has turned that propaganda back on them and said, well, if ISIS is really your enemy, then we need to be Assad's allies. We need to bring them in. We need a global coalition to go on in and get rid of ISIS, whoever they really are and whoever they are really working for. And the U.S. is now stuck in a propaganda quagmire of their own making. And Iran is now in on that as well. Yes, let us all support a global coalition against this terrorist group, ISIS. They're really bad. We've seen Rita Katz's videos. We agree. We're going to take ISIS out. And the U.S. foreign policy establishment is out there saying, okay, what do we do now? We never planned for somebody to actually go out and get Emmanuel Goldstein. How are we going to get our war with Oceania going now if we don't have an evil enemy to wag at people? Which is why they're trying to turn Russia back into the evil empire, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan. There's another article, also Russia Insider, the Putsch Pirates of the Potomac, Part 1. I love the alliteration. And basically going back over what we already know. The U.S.-backed Ukrainian coup of 2014 was a reckless attempt to reignite the Cold War. The difference is everybody knows that's what they were doing. And everybody is seeing that the blowback was apparently caught the United States entirely by surprise. The U.S. apparently thought they were going to get Ukraine all in one chunk. They were going to take Crimea and its naval bases away from Russia. Then they were going to arm the border between Ukraine and Russia and just wait for Russia to make a move. And, oh, by golly, we're off and running. But the Ukrainian people fooled them all. They changed the dynamic of U.S. covert overthrows. And they said, all right, you get the capital city. Doesn't mean we got to go along. We're going to break off and go our own way. Crimea did it first, followed by Lugansk, Donetsk. And it does break the model because the U.S. has been conquering all these other nations with covert overthrows, and the people of those nations didn't realize the supposed humanitarian democratic revolution in their country was actually done by outsiders. And then they scratch their heads and wonder why life got worse. Now everybody knows why. They know what was done to them. And even those nations already under U.S. puppet rule are getting very restive because they don't like what was done to them. Now, Sergei Lavrov has raised a valid point. If the U.S. crushes Assad, gets him out of Damascus, who's going to fill that power vacuum immediately? It's going to be ISIS. And at that point, ISIS might decide they don't need to work for the United States any longer. This kind of blowback has happened before. You need to remember, many years ago, Israel actually created Hamas through Shin Bet. And they did it in order to divide Palestine politically. Yasser Arafat and his PLO were basically functioning as the de facto government of Palestine, and Israel didn't want to have a single contact point. So they created Hamas as a controlled opposition group. Ooh, we are opposing Yasser Arafat. And then Israel could dodge the issue of peace talks by saying, we don't know who to talk to. Should we talk to PLO? Should we talk to Hamas? We don't know, so we're not going to show up at the peace conference. And then, of course, Yasser Arafat was assassinated. And all of a sudden, Hamas realized, we're the government of Palestine. And maybe we ought to act like one. And at that point, they stopped taking direction from Israel, at which point Israel created the Palestinian Authority as the new controlled opposition so that Israel could duck the peace talks by saying, do we talk to Hamas? Do we talk to the Palestinian Authority? We don't know, so we're not going to show up at the peace talks anymore. You can see how this game gets played. If you can create an opposition group in somebody's country, then you can basically ignore them. We don't know who's really in charge. Now, the U.S. and its allies have created what they're calling the interim Syrian government to step on in when Assad falls. The problem is they may show up and find the buildings all locked and ISIS on the other side. And that would make things worse, not better. But unfortunately, too much of our foreign policy is being thought of solely in terms of immediate objective and long-term consequences. That's somebody else's term in office. I don't have to worry about that. Now, Chuck Schumer is out there assuring us all that if the United States quits the Iran deal, U.S. sanctions will still put meaningful pressure on Tehran. We're going to slap them around real good. Well, Chucky, a couple of things you need to pay attention to. U.S. sanctions are a credible threat against other countries in a world that is dominated by the U.S. dollar. That world is fading away bit by bit by bit by bit. Okay? That's the reality there. Second, Tehran is just going to do business with all those other countries that are not going along with the U.S. policy on this. And let's not forget, one of the scandals that is dogging Hillary Clinton is that the U.S. State Department was handing out waivers for the Iran sanctions to political cronies all the time who went on doing business with Iran despite the public saying about, we've got sanctions on Iran. The sanctions had more holes than Swiss cheese, or the cheese grater for that matter. So Schumer's out there talking tough, but he's basically bluffing. The threat of U.S. sanctions is not what it once was, because the U.S. dollar is not the unrivaled challenge, global challenge. In fact, Kerry is out there saying that with all the foreign pressure on the U.S. dollar, if the U.S. rejects the Iran deal, it could actually knock the dollar out of its top position as a global trade and banking currency. And I think he's absolutely right. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm just looking at all this stuff going on with Syria and the constant attacks by Americans. Even back in 2013, the U.S. was bombing Damascus. And let me just get this done. There. All righty, getting on back to the news. A collection, if you will, coalition of 36 retired United States generals and admirals have announced their support for the Iran deal. Now, during the break, I saw on Fox News they're flooding it with this commercial about Americans against a nuclear Iran. And you will call your members of Congress and tell them to oppose the Iranian nuclear deal because we want an Iran free from nuclear weapons. And you understand how absolutely Orwellian that is, because the Iran nuclear deal is designed to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Without any nuclear deal, there's nothing stopping Iran from moving forward to make nuclear weapons. And the propaganda is trying to convince everybody that this Iran deal allows Iran to build nuclear weapons. It's the complete reverse. Black is white, up is down. You're through the looking glass. And they're just spending huge amounts of money on this thing. Probably coming from the same people who are paying all those corporate media talking heads tens of millions of dollars every year to lie to you. Now, these retired generals and admirals are basically saying that this deal is the best way to keep Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Not that anybody expects Iran would do anything with them, because Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another country in 200 years. And these generals and admirals said military action should only be allowed after every possible diplomatic path is exhausted. And, of course, that's why Israel's trying to kill this deal. They're going to get their whores in Congress to veto this deal, and then Netanyahu will stand up and say, well, diplomacy has failed. You American kids, please go kill the Iranians for us. That's what he's going to do. Diplomacy isn't failing. It's being murdered. It's being sabotaged. Because Netanyahu's ego wants millions of young American boys and young American girls to march into Israel's enemy, Iran, and give them what for? Now, interestingly enough, Jane's Defense, which is a highly regarded military industry website and publisher, they consider very accurate, straight dope. They don't get hysterical. And they're responding to recent claims coming out of the U.S. propaganda that Iran is trying to sanitize the Parchin facility ahead of inspections by the IAEA to hide the atomic bombs they're building there. And James is pointing out satellite imagery published by a U.S. think tank is showing there's nothing going on at the building. It's just sitting there. Nobody's there with trucks. Nobody's there with cleanup crew. And all of this goes back to the fact that Iran constructed a large explosives containment vessel in 2000. Oh, it must be for a bomb. Not necessarily. Iran has become a world leader in the creation of synthetic industrial diamonds. That's big business around the globe. And it has been reported that this Parchin facility's explosive chamber is how they're creating synthetic microdiamonds for industrial purposes. And if they've invented a process to do that, that's something Iran wants to keep secret. For purely commercial reasons, they don't want the United States or Israel ripping off their technology any more than we would want Israel ripping off our technology, which they do anyway. But even Jane's defense is saying we're not seeing anything indicative of a cover-up over at the Parchin facility. And you cannot rule out that explosives testing is being done for non-nuclear purposes, even if it's for conventional weapons. That's not covered by any Iran deal. Iran has a right, especially in the face of U.S. and Israeli belligerents, to be developing weapons. Now, over in Yemen, the entire country is crumbling from the proxy war being fought by Saudi Arabia on behalf of the United States to teach those people of Yemen, you do not kick out your U.S. puppet rulers. 4,300 people have been killed so far, 22,000 injured since March 19th. And it's a major humanitarian catastrophe because the U.S. and Saudi Arabia will not allow in humanitarian aid. And the reason they're doing that, this is collective punishment of the Yemenite people for trying to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. That's what's going on. And the entire nation is on the verge of collapse, at which point the U.S. will say, we have to humanitarianly invade these people and take over the country and run it for democracy and human rights and all the other excuses they give for yet another invasion. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab this phone call, even though I don't know who you are or where you're calling from, but hello, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Are you there? Apparently not. All right, getting on back to the news here. Now, there's a very interesting article out of The Guardian again. Pentagon needs to rethink calling war journalists belligerents. This is coming out of Reporters Without Borders. And they're responding to a recent release of a military manual from the U.S. Defense Secretary's office that had very troubling language on how the military was going to treat reporters, not to mention bloggers, as if the assumption is they're foreign spies and troublemakers. Now, if you are a government that is lying to your own people about the reason for war, then yeah, a reporter, either corporate or blogger, is a potential threat. But you're not supposed to go on out there and say, everybody out there, you are a threat to us because you're not supposed to know what the war is really being fought about, and we expect you to salute the flag and just blindly obey, because that's what makes America great. So, a lot of criticism being leveled at these latest announced changes in U.S. military policy. Okay, Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's all about dollar, it's about the dollar, man. Look at what that John Kerry's come right out of the horse's mouth.
Yep.
That's it, people. He said it. What we've been saying, this is what the deal's all about. This is what Cuba's all about. This is what the Russian provocations that we're doing against them is all about. John Kerry said it, plain and simple.
Well, one of the things that I agree with the new Pope about is when he first got poped, he came out with a very telling statement. Money is supposed to serve the people, The people are not supposed to serve the money. When the United States was founded, we had a system where the money was a utility serving the community and the nation, and the private central bankers have reversed that. They've brought us to the edge of a new neo-feudalism, where all serve the money, all live by the permission and will of the money, and the lust for money drives itself forward. The imbalance of debt to money created by private central banks inevitably leads to war, conquest, and destruction. And then they'll loan you the money to rebuild after it's all over.
It shows you they're out of time and they ran out of places to loot, pretty much, because that's what stopped them in Ukraine. They couldn't go to the east, so they're out of time and they're out of places to continue the Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, I'm sure that they don't see it that way. I'm sure that the money junkies, the private central bankers at the very top, they're saying, let's just have a bloody world war, we'll kill off most of the people, wreck the entire planet, and then for the next 100 years we'll loan all these people money to allow them to rebuild what we just took away from them. Isn't it fun being a money junkie?
You're going to see factions now already infighting, and you're going to be splits inside the government now.
I'm already seeing it, and not just splits inside the government. We're beginning to see faction fights within the private central banking cartel itself, because it's kind of like a game of musical chairs. When the music stops, everybody is scrambling for a chair because they don't want to eat that default. They're trying to figure some way that the American people get stuck with that debt. Dustin, I have to let you go. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. The calls are coming on in here. And before we start taking them, very interesting story came out of, it was a YouTube video, but the YouTube video was being made of social media. This is a developing story. Apparently, the Pentagon, or actually this is coming from the Obama administration itself, has ordered the U.S. Army to recover all of the Apache attack helicopters currently in use by the state National Guard units. We're talking a total of 192 Apaches that are currently deployed with the National Guard around this country, and they're being transferred back to the active duty Army. Now, this could signal one of two things. One, and this is very probable, the U.S. military is starting to run out of equipment and supplies after all this thrashing around in other people's countries. Or the U.S. government is concerned that if the states turn against the federal government at some crisis in the future, that those Apaches are going to be used by the state National Guards to protect their borders from federal encroachment. And it could be a combination of the two. But it is a very interesting development, and one which, not too surprisingly, the corporate media doesn't seem to be covering. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here real quick. Mo in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for taking my call. I got two questions. First of all, one of them is concerning Hillary Clinton and her thumb drives. You know, I could never understand, other than Nixon, when Nixon did the tape thing, that just for posterity, whatever, why he just didn't burn the tapes. But why didn't Hillary just get rid of the thumb drives and get rid of the evidence, number one? And my other question was, where does somebody start? I'm kind of a computer Luddite. I'm not like you. I'm using them for 20-something years. But where do you start from? You need to be get off the grid internet-wise. Do you start with Linux, or I do use Start Page for my email? But where do you? How do you?
Well, the only way you get off the grid is to disconnect entirely and air gap your entire life. And, that's the only way you can do it. Everything is now backdoored. There are indications that the Linux core has been compromised by the NSA. Because let's face it, if the NSA is going to go on out and they're going to put backdoors in Windows and in the Apple operating systems and the smartphones and everything, they're not going to leave any operating system untouched that people are going to start flocking to for the sake of privacy. The people who are developing the Linux core, they're constrained from saying anything But the hints and indications are that, yeah, it is. And it's probably safest to assume. If it's electronic, if it's connected to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or the Internet, then assume it is compromised and don't put anything on there that you would not want to share with the pastor of your local church and both your parents. That's basically what it comes down to. Now, with regard to Nixon burning the tapes and or Hillary with the thumb drive and everything else, it's called obstruction of justice. Once these pieces of evidence are known to be in existence, destruction of them is obstruction of justice, and that is immediate jail time and impeachment. In fact, obstruction of justice was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, and the only way he saved himself from being impeached was he resigned. And the same thing is true of the thumb drive that David Kendall has. Now that it's known to be there because of Larry Klayman's lawsuit, they have to treat it as evidence of a potential lawsuit of interest. And Kendall may, now that Klayman's lawsuit has been kicked out by a Clinton-appointed judge, Kendall may go ahead and destroy it and say it wasn't valid for any ongoing litigation or investigation, therefore I'm free to destroy it. It would be dangerous for him to do that. He could wind up disbarred. But there are laws that say this information has to be protected, and especially in the case of Hillary Clinton's emails, those are not her personal property. All of the emails she issued and accepted as Secretary of State are technically the property of the American people and under the jurisdiction of the United States Congress, and now, of course, various criminal investigative bodies. And I knew a lot of people back when Nixon was going through the tapes issue, and they said, he ought to just burn them on the front lawn and say, that's the end of that. Well, that would have been the red carpet to impeachment then and there. Presidents are not allowed to hide things from we the people. Obama's out there calling himself the most transparent administration in history. The behavior is quite exactly the opposite. But it has to do with obstruction of justice. Once you are known to have something of evidentiary value in your possession, if something bad happens to it, you know, you're going to get hauled into court and you're probably going to go to jail.
You know, she could have lost some thumb drives that we don't even know about, right?
Well, there's probably thumb drives out there that we don't know about. And as you heard on the SRN news break, Hillary's people are making this big deal about, oh, we're cooperating, we're turning over the server. But common sense has to tell you, it's been cleaned, it's been sanitized, it's been gone over by Hillary, it's been gone over by whoever Hillary hired to do her IT, it's been gone over by David Kendall, it's been gone over by the Hillary campaign. They're not going to find anything on there at all. It's been way, way too long. What they should have done when this email scandal broke is send in the SWAT team to kick down the door, fling in the flashbang grenades, and grab that server before they had a chance to clean it up. You know, when they do a drug raid, the goal is to get in there before the evidence can be destroyed. And in this case, how many months have they given Hillary and her people to sanitize this server? And we already know some of those hard drives have been reformatted because that was announced.
Drug raids are just for the little people. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch over here to Damien in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm willing to bet she's got her staff going through to pick out the juicy bits of blackmail material to before they go ahead and erase them.
Oh, they were doing that even before the scandal broke here. But what's interesting is apparently her staff wasn't as careful as Hillary thought because 4 classified emails were found in the material that has been released to the public. And I'm sure that was never intended. So somebody somewhere made a mistake. Maybe she's working them too hard, not paying them enough. But 4 classified emails got through the filters.
Did you get that email about where the State Department denies that those sanctions, those exceptions that Hillary made even exist?
Yeah, they're out there. There isn't a shred of evidence that, Hillary Clinton not a single shred of evidence remains, and I don't believe the State Department about anything. I don't believe anything the U.S. government says at all, period. I don't believe corporate media about anything they say except the sports scores and the weather report, and frankly, they're not all that good on the weather report either.
No, I'm right there with you. The last thing I was going to say was I really don't understand why we're having all these discussions about nuclear weapons and all this. There should not be any nuclear weapons. There should be not any nuclear anything. We have enough evidence in history showing us that there is really no health benefit to having nuclear power plant or anything of that sort. There's no reason to be wagging, I have more nuclear weapons than you do. There's no reason for any of that.
There's no rational reason. There's no rational reason, but the leaders of countries are not rational people. They're sociopaths. That's why they work so hard to become the leaders of countries. And nobody wants to be the first to destroy their nuclear arsenal because they don't know if the people who follow are going to keep their promise. Certainly the United States government has a terrible track record of keeping their commitments for any kind of weapons reductions. The U.S. signed a treaty to get rid of all their chemical and biological weapons almost 20 years ago, and they still haven't done it. I mean, looking at that track record, who's going to trust the U.S., which is the only nation to have used nuclear weapons against civilians, to actually keep their promises about anything? We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Damien. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right to the phones here. Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I remember reading about in the end of World War II, people would be pulled out of their homes and new people would be given their homes.
Where was that happening?
Kind of, in Europe in World War II.
Yeah, that actually
better than I do.
That actually did happen in France. It was part of the punishment of the collaborators and the Vichy government, who had cooperated with the Nazis when they came on in, and when the legitimate French government regained power, they weren't going to be very gentle with those people. And yes, a lot of them had their homes taken away from them, and the homes were given to people who had suffered under the Vichy government. All of the French women who had consorted with the Nazis, to put it politely and delicately, their heads were shaved bald as a form of public shame and humiliation. That actually backfired, because all the guys in France were looking at these girls with nearly bald heads and saying, they're easy. They were willing to hump the Nazis. I'll bet you I can take them out. And they became very, very popular. And so all the women in France who were getting ignored started shaving their hair short. And that was the beginning of the European women's short hairstyle craze that lasted through like the 1960s.
Well, anyway, I've read that, they want to kind of rearrange our neighborhoods in America. That they'd like to see, in Minnesota now, there's no Murphys or Petersons anymore. Everybody's from somewhere else.
Well, that gets back.
You go downtown Minneapolis, and you don't. It's like you're in a different country.
Well, that gets back to my theory that the reason for all this open borders policy here in the U.S. and across Europe is there's a deliberate attempt to dilute and blur our sense of a national identity ahead of the declaration of a one-world government. And there was a story that came out, I think, about a month ago, where the Obama administration literally wanted to impose quotas on neighborhoods. You will have so many residents from this country, so many residents from this economic strata, so many residents from that one. It didn't really go very far, because the people in the very rich neighborhoods were saying, no, you're not going to start, quoting, poor people into our neighborhood. And so that one died a very quick and merciful death. But yeah, I'm the only thing that makes any sense whatsoever, this open border policy, bringing in all of these people who can't make it in their own countries, people carrying contagious diseases, people, some of whom are very much criminals. And yes, Donald Trump is right. The governments of these Central and American governments in Mexico are taking the opportunity to get rid of their undesirables. Castro did exactly the same thing when the U.S. opened up Florida to the Cuban immigrants. And the only thing that makes any sense, because it's not helping the economy, It's not making our nation greater. It is straining our existing infrastructure and social welfare system. The only thing that makes sense is it is a deliberate plan to blur our sense of a national identity. And that also probably explains why they're going after the Confederate flag and the Gadsden flag, and now apparently the PWMIA flag is under attack. They want to destroy all the symbols of the American identity so that we are all one common herd of livestock that sees no other authority or identity than the dollar sign that rises rampant over our globe.
Listen, I took some accounting classes from a professor that was a farmer, and he was in his last year of 40 years of teaching, and he said, you know, everything comes from real things, trees, the soil, animals, and we just can't, you know, print money and pass it out. We got to go back to people doing things to get those real things, you know.
He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right.
And do you remember those old TV shows where they'd have the guy up on stage or the girl too, and they'd be spinning the plates, and then it'd all go to crash at the end? I think that's where we're at about now.
Yeah. You know, any chaotic system is eventually going to come undone. And again, the core of private central banking is inherently unstable because it produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. It's an unstable system.
I think about, you know, offense, you know, someone bringing stolen goods to somebody and then they, you know, deal behind the scenes to get the money for it. I mean, it seems so much of what was going on is like we're dealing with fences.
We're dealing with criminals. That's the reality. Mm-hmm. The U.S. government has become criminal. Wall Street's been criminal all along. Private central bankers are criminals. You know, but the media is always saying, oh, pay no attention to those people in the white collars. You know, you should be afraid of the muggers and the rapists and the guy who's going into the convenience store to steal a loaf of bread for his family. They're the bad people. I remember when Charles Keating finally got brought down for the Lincoln Savings and Loan disaster. Remember the Keating Five? John McCain, John Glenn, I forget the other three. Keating stole in that year, through his fraud, he stole more money with his one fraud than all of the robberies, holdups, and muggings for the entire country for the entire year. But always media says, you know, it's those street criminals. We've got to deal with them. And I remember right after the 2008 debacle, there was this amazing documentary that came out called Inside Job, and it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary that year, and then promptly disappeared while HBO rushed out this made-for-TV movie about the banking crisis that portrayed all these Wall Street executives as good guys just caught with bad luck and doing their best to make the best of a good situation. And I can't even remember. Too Big to Fail. And it was just purest propaganda to make the bankers look good, because we can never blame the bankers for this mess here. It's all the fault of the hackers and the content pirates, and it's all, you know, it's all blame shifting. But it is absolute and complete garbage.
I'm going to get rid of cable and just go back to watching Mayberry and, you know, the Rockford File. I don't think you have to pay big money to watch that good stuff.
Well, the prices on all cable are going up. The service is going down. All of a sudden here on Oahu, the digital rights management that has been added to our signal is screwing up TVs all over the place, and we're going to swap out our box and see if that fixes it. But as usual, a lot of money, a lot of inconvenience, a lot of problems. Not going to stop the content pirates. Just make everybody else's life miserable. And by the way, if anybody from Hollywood is listening to this, you're not losing money because of content pirates. You're not making anything that's worth stealing anymore. Look at the box office for last weekend's release of The Fantastic Four and take a lesson from it. We're sick of remakes, redos, and political correctness. That's why you're losing money. Stop blaming it on somebody else and loading us up with a bunch of junk. Jeff, gotta let you go, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, yesterday I was looking at the way Netanyahu has been behaving these last few months in his quest to derail the Iran deal so that he can declare diplomacy dead and then demand that hundreds of thousands of young American men and women be immediately sent over to clobber Iran just because Netanyahu hates them. And I said, when you consider the backlash that is building even within Israel's own government over the damage being caused to the relations between Israel and the U.S., it sounded like Netanyahu was just listening to his ego. And apparently, I'm not the only person thinking that, because over at U.S. News and World Report, they ran an article with this headline, Bibi, King of the Jews. And it is an observation that Netanyahu really does see himself as the savior of all the world's Jewish people. And it goes on to say that Netanyahu believes, or certainly acts like, Jewish people anywhere on earth owe their allegiance to him over and above the lands they live and work in. It's certainly the way they've been trying to conduct foreign policy inside the U.S. Congress. You know, if you're Jewish, you do what I tell you, to heck with the will of the people and due process and the rest of that. We serve a higher purpose. We serve the imaginary playmate in the sky. So Netanyahu apparently is listening to voices in his head and thinks they're coming from the imaginary playmate in the sky. Now, the other day, we've been talking about this horrible tragedy where some Israeli settlers from an illegal settlement attacked a Palestinian village. They set fire to a home, and an 18-month-old baby and the baby's father were burned to death. And it is an illustration of the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. Because if you're Palestinian and you attack an Israeli, you go to jail forever, if you are not shot dead on the spot. And Israel has a fund full of your tax dollars with which compensation is paid to any Israeli who's the victim of terror. But in this case, the Israelis who committed this attack have already been released without charges, and the Palestinian family is told they do not qualify for financial compensation to rebuild their home. Now, that's apartheid. When the laws are different for different ethnicities or religions within a country, that is apartheid. That is racism. Now, getting on to the economy, then things are not good. And just looking at the scorecard right now, we have 10 members of the European Union are in recession right now. Russia is in a recession. China and Canada going into a recession. It's coming apart all over. Adding fuel to the fire, earlier today, China devalued its yuan yet again, 2 days in a row. That's unprecedented. Now, officially, China is devaluing their yuan to make their export products look more attractive, which is going to happen. A lot of other people are saying this is basically a retaliation by China for U.S. efforts to undermine the yuan and the renminbi. In other words, it's a currency war. And the problem with currency wars is they very quickly cross the line into real wars, which appears to be what the U.S. wants. Now, today, the plunge protection team did save the U.S. markets. The Dow almost got down within 126 of touching the 16,000 level, which would have panicked everybody. But the plunge protection team put on their tights and their cape and their masks, and they left it and saved it, and just managed to get it a tiny, tiny microscopic fraction into the green at the end of the market day. And everybody knows that's what they did, because there was no other reason for the markets to rebound after the devaluation. Because the devaluation is not really a good thing across the board for the U.S. I'm sure that you are all looking for a drop in price of those things that you buy that are made in China over at the big box stores. And yeah, we might see that. Of course, the owners of those big box stores might just simply absorb the gains and bolster their own corporate profits, since nobody's going to complain about it any longer. But there's going to be a hit from China's devaluation 2 days in a row, because there are states in the U.S. that actually succeed in exporting goods to China. There are 39 states in the United States that are exporting goods to China. It's terribly imbalanced, and the imbalance is now going to get worse. because the American products in China have just doubled in value. Doubled in cost, rather, not doubled in worth. There are a lot of businesses in America that are trying to manufacture and make products to compete with Chinese imports, and now that just became far more difficult to do as Chinese import prices fall. Currency wars are not good things. They don't help ordinary people and ordinary businesses. It's just the money junkies wagging their genitalia at each other and saying, I am greater than you are. Article out of Global Research up in Canada, the U.S. King dollar has no clothes. They're calling the Federal Reserve note toilet paper money, and they're absolutely right. And people have been brainwashed in this country and around the globe to accept this Federal Reserve IOU, which is what it is, and believe it has the best security and guarantee. And it doesn't. It's already losing value like crazy. The value is being inflated away by running that printing press and typing into that computer and dumping all the extra numbers onto Wall Street so that they can do, like they did today, buy up the stocks as quickly as they're being dumped to make the stock market look good. And by the way, that is another symptom of fascism. When the government gives up trying to actually make things better and spends all of its time and energy just making things look good, that too is a symptom that we are living under fascism. And it is not just the currency wars. The U.S. has decided to kick up the oil price war again. OPEC has now cranked up their production to a 3-year high, and they're doing it apparently to try and put more pressure on Russia and also to counter the fact that as Iran starts making these oil deals with other countries, Iran's output is surging. They want to undermine that and crush oil prices. It's all very reckless and it's very dangerous. We are in the grip of too many governments who see bloody war as their best option. Or even if it's not their best option, it's going to be fun. Yeah, we're going to kill a lot of people and blow up a lot of historically important landmarks, but we're going to have fun either way. It doesn't matter. Because it's not like it's my kids or my money. You know, I just sit back and watch it all here. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Andrea, are you there? Going once, going twice. We seem to be having some issues with the telephone. Okay, Andrea, we got to take a break for commercials here. I'm going to put you back on hold, and hopefully we will have this phone issue sorted out when we come back from the commercial break. Meanwhile, Israeli banks are starting to hit the panic button over the potential of a looming European boycott over what's been going on in Palestine. And they're out there screaming, you're anti-Semites, you're anti-Semites, you're anti-Semites, you're anti-Semites. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right back to the phone here and see if Andrea in Oklahoma, are you there now?
Yes, I am here. Aloha. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. And what is on your mind?
Okay. It's my understanding that the Congress at any time can buy the Federal Reserve out and for $1 billion and stop the madness. But they don't because they like the insanity of sending $50 billion to Israel and having the money come back and forth. And plus, if I'm thinking maybe the only reason maybe why they don't buy the Federal Reserve out is anybody goes and gets rid of the Federal Reserve in their country, then they come after them with a vengeance, and they do have radiation in their embassy there in New York.
Well, I'm not going to tangle that up with what's going on with Israel's consulate in New York, but there's absolutely no question. You are correct. When the Federal Reserve was granted its charter in 1913, it was originally for 100 years because the charters for the First and Second Bank of the United States had only been for 20, and the bankers came up against huge fights getting those things renewed. So they said, well, you know, we're going to bribe Congress. We'll get a 100-year charter. They're not going to care because it's, you know, not going to come up again while they're still alive. And then later on, I think it was in the 1936, Congress voted to amend the charter for the Federal Reserve to make it open-ended. There is no expiration date on it. But you are absolutely correct. The U.S. Congress has the legal authority to rescind that charter at any time, and their only obligation is to return back to the owners of the Federal Reserve the $1 billion that was transferred to the U.S. government when the Federal Reserve was created. Because the bankers created a financial crisis, and they put the government in the spot of really needing that $1 billion. I mean, back then $1 billion was a lot of money. It was a huge amount of money. And the people who created the Federal Reserve on Jekyll Island manipulated the economy to get the nation into such a situation where the government really was looking at, all right, $1 billion, we could really use that. And that's how they got that through. And the Congress can rescind the charter for the Federal Reserve. They can return that $1 billion, and that would be the end of it. But you're absolutely right. Everybody who stands up to the Federal Reserve gets attacked and killed, and including presidents and including entire countries. Plus, Wall Street is among the most generous of campaign contributors every election cycle. And these whores in Washington, D.C., they're not going to turn off that cash flow. And it doesn't matter what's right, wrong, or indifferent. They're there for money, wealth, power, and luxury, and that's really all they really care about. So we're going to have to let the system implode across the globe, and then the people of planet Earth are going to have to rise as one people and say, no more privately owned central banks ever, ever, ever again. It's always going to be public currencies managed as public utilities, and we've got to keep these money junkies and sociopaths confined in a little asylum somewhere where they're not going to be a threat to future generations of humanity.
Okay, now let's just say that somebody had a backbone in our Congress. Let's say a whole bunch of them got together and they grew a spine and said, okay, let's fork over that $1 billion. What countries could Israel get together to come after it? So I guess they could get China and Russia, but maybe.
Yeah, they wouldn't even have to come after us. They would just have to involve us in enough wars to bankrupt the government, so the government would be forced to go back to the private central bank. That's what happened after the War of 1812. The War of 1812 was engineered by the bankers in response to Congress' refusal to renew the charter for the first bank of the United States. And even though the United States won the War of 1812, and was not brought back to colonial status under Great Britain and the Bank of England, it bankrupted the U.S. government to the point where they had to accept a charter for the Second Bank of the United States to pay off their debts, and that charter lasted until Andrew Jackson shut it down, at which point there was an assassination attempt on his life. And if you have not already read All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you need to look at that. The online text article especially, lots of photos, lots of information, and it really tells the story of the history of the United States of America as this ongoing battle between honest money and private central banks' Ponzi schemes. Okay?
But we're bankrupt anyway.
We're always going to be bankrupt under a private central bank because the debt is always greater than the available money supply. It's designed that way. Remember that quote from the movie The Independent? The essence of the banking industry is to keep us all, whether we are individuals or nations, slaves to debt. That's it. That's what they're in business to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Michael Rivero.
All right, thank you very much. Aloha. We're going to switch over to Anthony in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just want to get your opinion on the election. At INFOWARS, they're kind of stating that the whole purpose of Donald Trump is to help Hillary Clinton win the election. And for me, from my perspective, I think the only reason they're talking about that is to kind of try to prep up Rand Paul. I know Alex Jones, I heard Alex Jones in an interview with Alan Combs admitting he kind of had a close relationship with Rand Paul.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you think that's the reason why they're even mentioning that, because that doesn't make any sense. Donald Trump kind of came up and said that she was the worst Secretary of State the U.S. has ever had. So I don't know if you agree with that theory at all.
No, I don't agree with that theory. It's certainly being used by people to try and derail Donald Trump or discredit him. But here's the reality, okay? If the GOP really honestly thought that Donald Trump's function was to help Hillary win the White House, they wouldn't be kicking him out. because of all his popularity, the GOP could win the White House from Hillary by getting behind Donald Trump. They're literally risking losing the White House. And they did it in 2008 and 2012 by kicking out Ron Paul and pushing Mitt Romney, and they lost the White House. So...
that's true, but there's a lot of polls, I don't know if they're accurate, but there's a lot of polls basically stating that Donald Trump pretty much has no chance against whether it even be Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, and the only person that would have a chance is Jeb Bush. But my argument against that is that whether it's Jeb Bush or Scott Walker or Hillary Clinton, those people are all the same. There's no difference between those candidates either. So
that's exactly why Donald Trump is popular. He's not seen as establishment. He's not seen as a branded, manufactured candidate. He's a maverick from outside, and even the chairman of the Republican National Committee is saying he's a breath of fresh air for the voters. Without question, without question, we're going to see all kinds of ginned up polls and all these expert opinions about why Trump is finished, and we saw exactly the same thing used against Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. It is the Ron Paul treatment against Donald Trump. If it doesn't work, they're going to try the Robert Kennedy approach on him. So I hope Donald Trump is wearing his Kevlar, because these people play for keeps. And in many ways, I think Donald Trump is a little dangerously naive about what political hardball really means in the United States government.
Fair enough. Just one last thing, though, about Donald Trump. He's a bit of a warmonger. He says he would have been tougher on Iran. Those things I kind of don't agree with. And just one last point regarding Rand Paul. Talk about an idiot, eh? Like, his poll rankings have dropped to 3%. If he would have stuck with his father's principles, he probably would have been second behind Donald Trump right now. And what he's done is he's lost his libertarian base. Most of them have gone over to Donald Trump. And he's become completely irrelevant. Those people that were criticizing him because he was Ron Paul's son, they never would have supported him anyway. So he's completely thrown himself in the dust. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, Rand Paul did it to himself. He should have continued in the tradition of his father's principles, but right from the beginning, he was out there, he was kissing Israel's butt and basically going with the flow. I think he's got daddy issues. He wants to outdo his father, and he's willing to sell out all of his principles to accomplish that, and it will be his undoing.
Yeah, and his poll numbers are lower now than his dad's were a few years ago, so it definitely hasn't helped him out. But anyway, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot to you. We're going to let you go, and we're coming up on our top of the hour news break. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the economy. We'll be talking about Hillary and her email woes. More is developing there. Hillary might not even make it to the election. They're talking criminal prosecution now. Hillary's campaign's trying to figure out some way they can get past this so then it won't be mentioned in 2016. Fat chance I'm going to mention it all through 2016. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome to the show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I'm looking at Fox, and at this point, Fox News, as far as I'm concerned, is a total joke. But it is worth looking at to see what the propagandists are hoping you're going to buy into. And I noticed they were trying to talk about the popularity and trends of various candidates, and they're going back to like March and April poll numbers to say, see, they're trending upward here, and we don't see anything at all from June or July or any of that stuff. Now, getting on back to the economy, Kraft Heinz just had a merger. They're going to cut 2,500 jobs there, and it's all about cutting costs as the economy slows down. And here in Hawaii, there may be trouble in paradise because Hawaii boomed up originally and was a target for U.S. acquisition, not only because of the strategic military location, the unsinkable battleship Hawaii, but because the state was just this wonderful agricultural paradise, as it were. Unfortunately, over time, agriculture has been taken over mostly by companies that are growing things for export, and a lot of former agricultural land is now sitting underneath housing developments, most of which remain empty. And Hawaii's government has launched a new program called the Aloha Plus Challenge, with the stated goal of doubling local food production here in Hawaii to where 1/3 of all the food consumed in Hawaii is grown here in Hawaii by the year 2030. Now, obviously what that means is Hawaii is not able to be food independent. The population has boomed up. It's crowded. Everybody wants a home in Hawaii. And most of our current agricultural land, as I said before, is used by corporations that grow products for export, like sugar and pineapple. And if the economy around the globe collapses, Hawaii better move very quickly to form some strategic partnerships, or we're going to be eating each other after 3 months. Plus, there is that problem of a mushroom cloud right out that window that we all have to worry about. Now, here's an interesting story that came out of Huffington Post, no less, how the Obama administration is helping big bank felons. And what they're talking about is the White House and the Justice Department have gone along with a change of policy by the Department of Housing and Urban Development that allows big banks already convicted of felonies to continue participating in the federal mortgage program. So what if you're a crook? We're all crooks here. Come on in. That's basically what's going on. These are banks convicted of felony fraud. Sure, come on in. The whole government has gone criminal. And by the way, that is to be expected, because the moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other. And what that means is once a government starts to go bad, it will go all the way bad. That's where we are right now. Now, in another stunning judicial abuse, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia have granted a petition filed by the defense contractor Kellogg, Brown & Root, saying that internal company files containing evidence that the company defrauded the U.S. government during the war in Iraq can be kept secret. You're not allowed to know what KBR was doing to defraud you out of your tax money. It's none of your business, really. You should be worried about Kim Kardashian and her argument with the FDA over the social media picture where she's holding a bottle of somebody's pills. How dare she do that? Now, here's something that's getting a little bit weird. We have been talking about how college education costs have spiraled totally out of sync with the rate of inflation. College has become hideously expensive, especially in the for-profit institutions. Support has dried up, and college education these days isn't about empowerment or education or advancement. It's just another mechanism to plunge young Americans onto that debt hook early and hard so they can't get off. And a lot of people will accept $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 worth of student loan debt on the promise that their college degree will guarantee them a high-paying job with which they can repay the loans. Well, apparently there has been a move in the government to require for-profit colleges like the University of Phoenix and ITT Tech to be able to document that their graduates are succeeding in finding jobs after they finish school. Not too surprisingly, the for-profit colleges are saying, no, we're not going to do that. Just take it on faith. And it's interesting to note that students at the for-profit colleges represent only 11% of college students, but they make up 44% of students who end up defaulting on their student loans. College these days is sold as a fashion accessory. Oh, yes, you will be young and hip and trendy if you have a college degree. There are no jobs for it, but you can put that thing up on the wall and feel really good about yourself. So let's talk about politics now. And we're seeing a continuing backlash over the treatment of Donald Trump by Fox News during the debates. And there's an interesting article over at crooksandliars.com where Trump supporters bring Fox News and Roger Ailes to their knees. There are online petitions all over that Megyn Kelly ought to be fired. And Fox News and Megyn are trying to defend their actions by saying it was in the best principles of journalistic endeavor. But they never asked Chris Christie about Bridgegate. They never talked to Scott Walker about allegations that he was part of a scheme for illegally coordinating fundraising when he fought off the recall effort or the campaign against public workers, which led to the campaign for the recall. They didn't ask Rick Perry about his recent indictment for coercing a public official. They didn't ask Carla Fiorini about how she almost ran Hewlett-Packard into the ground while CEO. They didn't ask Mike Huckabee about his molestation scandal that has resurfaced. They didn't ask Ted Cruz about the fact he's not actually a natural-born citizen. They just pounded on Donald Trump. Everybody saw it. And even going beyond that, we had callers into the show who were pointing out it looked like the Fox moderators were just throwing these softball questions to Jeb Bush. And one of the ones they did was a question that he has ducked up until recently about knowing what we know now about the war in Iraq, would you have gone in? And Jeb Bush finally committed and said, well, if we'd known back then what we know now, no, I would not have gone in. It was a mistake. Okay, the problem with that being that Jeb Bush and Fox News are perpetuating the lie that this was all just an innocent little mistake and that we didn't know better. And we already know that's not true. The other Bush concocted this lie about weapons of mass destruction to justify an invasion of Iraq, to punish them for selling their oil for the euro. And Jeb Bush knows it. And Fox News knows it, and they're still out there lying to you because that's what these people get paid millions of dollars to do. Not Megyn Kelly, she's only making $250,000 a year. But there were the others who are making $5-10 million a year. They're paid to be convincing liars, to fool you, to snooker you. That's why they get the big money. Now, we got to take a break for commercials. When we come back, going to be talking about the email scandal. This is not ever going to go away, because you and I are going to see to it that it never goes away. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So let's talk about Emailgate or Servergate or Hillarygate or whatever gate we want to put on there. There are so many possibilities out there. And we're already hearing Hillary's campaign is trying to just somehow shove this into the past so they can say, what difference does it make? That's so last week. Let's deal with the here and now. Well, one of the benefits of the Internet is we have a collective memory, not subject to interference by political correctness or the government or corporations. They're trying and failing miserably and wasting a huge amount of money in the process, which I guess is okay because all these online shills, if they weren't being paid to lie to you on the Internet, they'd be over trying to get jobs at the fast food restaurants. And they're all converting to robotics anyway, so at least they're working even if they are amoral scum. Now, the Clinton campaign has made a big deal over the fact that they have turned over their private server to the Justice Department. Hillary's private server was in her home, has now been turned over to the Justice Department, which is nonsense. I mean, David Kendall is out there already saying, see, this proves we are cooperating with the FBI inquiry, as they keep on pounding the delete key. What they should have done when this story broke, they should have done what they do to the suspected drug criminals. Kick down the door with a SWAT team and grab the evidence before it can be altered and destroyed. And look how many months Hillary has been allowed to go through that server and sanitize it. It's ridiculous to say that we're cooperating now after all these months. It's too late. Nobody's going to believe that that server still has anything on it that Hillary does not want on there, unless they've made a mistake, and it does appear they may have. So that's their big talking point. See, we've got nothing to hide. We're cooperating with the FBI. We've given them the hardware. Now, one of the big talking points coming out of Hillary's campaign is, well, maybe this is classified now, but it wasn't at the time, therefore it was okay to have it on the server. Word coming out of the intelligence community is, no, you have to look at what the email contains. to decide whether it should have been put at public risk, because very often classification doesn't happen immediately until the import of the information is truly understood. I went through that many, many years ago when I was at JPL, and we put up this satellite called CSAT. And it was the first synthetic aperture radar ocean mapping for civilian purposes, and all of a sudden they started seeing in the data information of military importance. And it was all retroactively classified. So the intelligence community is saying this idea that it wasn't technically classified doesn't matter. It was sensitive information that should have been kept on protected government servers. And the situation is getting worse because whoever Hillary had trying to sanitize her email record, they messed up. There are 4 emails containing classified information. 2 of them were classified top secret special compartmentalized information, meaning what was in there, even other people with a top secret clearance can't see unless they're specifically brought into the compartment. And they're confirming that these documents were classified at the time Hillary had them on the server. Now, Hillary is trying to spin her way out of this email mess. What does it matter? It's somebody else's fault. Oh, that all happened so long ago. What difference does it make? But in the end, all of this comes down to one simple question. Can this nation survive another president who takes reckless chances, ignores the rules, and then just tries to blame others when it all falls apart? I don't think we can. That's a luxury we can't afford in the current state. Now, over at McClatchy, they're still trying to carry Hillary Clinton's water. One of their reporters actually came out trying to make a differentiation that the FBI is not investigating Hillary Clinton herself personally. No. They're investigating her conduct. And that's really such a huge, huge difference. Story over at Reason.com basically calling it like it is. Everything that Hillary Clinton has said under oath in public about her use of the private email server has turned out to be an absolute lie. It's an absolute lie. And remember, these 4 classified emails that have been discovered so far, these are ones that slipped through. We have no idea what other classified information was on that server before the cleaning crew showed up. Now, Trey Gowdy, who's the head of the House committee investigating the attack on the consulate in Benghazi, it said basically the same prosecutors who investigated former CIA Director David Petraeus are now investigating Clinton's handling of classified information. Hillary Clinton could face criminal prosecution over this. And Gowdy has said, it is clear Hillary is trying to control access to the public record, which she's not allowed to do because it is a public record. She almost got away with it, but not quite. So this has led to the suggestion that maybe Hillary's good friend Martha Stewart ought to stop giving her tips on interior decor and start giving her tips on how to survive being in prison. Possibly as a result of all these revelations, up in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders is now polling ahead of Hillary Clinton, 44-37. That is a huge gap, way beyond the statistical margin of error. So Bernie Sanders, if you're listening to this, please stay out of small planes and out of suburban parks. Just trust me on this one, okay? Stay in crowds. Be careful of strange Hillary people hanging around you, or hanging around your car brakes or the aircraft or whatever. Now, getting on back to Scott Walker, who was not quizzed about some of his crimes, which have now been thrown out of court, by the way. Scott Walker today just signed a new deal handing $400 million in Wisconsin tax money to billionaire NBA owners to construct a brand new stadium for the NBA's Milwaukee Bucks. Now, Scott is out there saying, oh, this will generate $3 return for every $1 we are sending out there. which maybe in a healthy economy could be done, but Wisconsins are saying, why don't these billionaire NBA owners build their own stadium? And so Scott Walker is thrashing around with trying to preserve his image as being concerned about ordinary people, which he lost with his attack on the public workers' unions. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We've got some callers waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you in just a minute here, but I want to catch up on some of these political stories here. We're looking at this scandal about public tax money spent to build these giant sports stadiums for these billionaire-owned sports teams to play around in. And they're always sold as a benefit to the community, and we will get a return on the tax money spent. It actually doesn't tend to pencil out all that much. It's just a giveaway. We want the billionaires hanging out here because they write campaign checks and so forth. And we're looking at a total cost to the American people so far of $12 billion, with a B, dollars spent to build 51 stadiums for ball games. That's it. $12 billion to have a place to play ball games. And I think a lot of people are very correct in chastising Scott Walker for signing this bill, because these billionaires who own the NBA teams, they can pay for their own stadiums. And then, let them keep more of the money. They still got to pay taxes. All the businesses in the stadium selling flags and beer and whatever else, they pay taxes. It's just cronyism here. Now, speaking of Scott Walker, he, like Hillary, had a political scandal on his heels, having to do with the campaign to recall him in 2012. And he just barely survived the recall effort, and after that it came out that Walker had personally been coordinating with conservative and big business advocacy groups that were fighting his recall. This is against Wisconsin law, and there's been an investigation. And just like the Clinton-appointed judge threw Larry Klayman's case out of court for no particular reason, because you're talking about a presidential candidate, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, many of whose members have the same financial backers as Scott Walker himself, threw that case out when Walker announced for the presidency. The corruption of the court system is just undeniable at this point. By the way, since the Fox News debate, they can't even find Rick Santorum's support in the polls. He's at 0%. Good news? Can't get any lower than that. All right, we're going to grab ourselves some phone calls. John in Illinois, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, quickly, since you're on the stadium thing, I do recall when the Green Bay Packers wanted to modernize their stadium or do whatever, they wanted to pass a 1% sales tax, or 1 penny sales tax, and they put it on a referendum, and the people of Brown County, even though they love the Packers, said no. NASCAR is going to be in Brooklyn, Michigan this week. That's why I ran for state rep in 2008. But I'm pretty sure that's called the Pure Michigan 400. Mm-hmm. Well, in Michigan, it's Michigan tourism, so the taxpayers are funding that. And then I think it was Cincinnati. They had bond issues for baseball and a football stadium. They couldn't make their first bond payment back. So, I mean, you look at baseball and NASCAR, nobody's sitting in the stands. Nobody can afford to go to these games because of the recession. So yeah, it's bread and circuses.
And for a lot of people, it's just boring. I mean, Little League in your own neighborhood, that I'll go see the kids play, but big professional team and everything doesn't hold any attraction. And I love the way that Jeff Dunham talks about NASCAR. They're making a left turn. They're making another left turn. I'm going for a beer. And I like Formula One now more than NASCAR. I mean, I appreciate the engineering that goes into it and that kind of stuff automotively, but nobody can afford. I mean, these cars are $400,000. So yeah, I appreciate Formula One for that reason. It is the engineering, and NASCAR is just Well, basically, look how NASCAR started. These were the rum runners, the bootleggers, and it's a charming little historical story, but that's basically what it is. It's the great-grandson of all the bootleggers and moonshiners, and, they bought themselves a sport. But they make enough money off the sport, they should be paying for their own events because they're making huge profits. And what we have here are these institutions, whether it's football or NASCAR, the rest of them, they're making tons of money, and they drop the costs onto the people, and they think that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay?
Right. No, quickly, I heard a great phrase that we should get to go viral and make a hashtag on RT today. Multinational jihadists. Some guy used that term twice in an interview on RT in the news this morning, and that really hit it right there. Every single candidate, Hillary Clinton, John McCain, Donald Trump even, needs to be asked, why are we spending money on multinational jihadists? Because, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, they're not multinational jihadists. They're a proxy army created by the U.S. to justify further military intervention in other countries. Okay?
Yeah, no, I mean, Chris Christie brought it up in the debate. He said that, which was nice, 71% of the federal budget is spent on entitlements and on interest to the national debt, while the other 29% support these proxy armies that are just blowing up the Middle East for a greater Israel. So that's what these candidates need to be asked. Why are you doing this?
Well, as long as corporate media is in charge of the debates, the candidates are going to get softball questions unless they're Donald Trump. And he's always going to get, have you stopped beating your wife? Have you stopped torturing your puppy dogs? And why are you such a misogynist, anti-immigrant, racist? And I can't fit the word in there. Anyway, John, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to end on the cusp of what you were talking about with the judges that always seem to get bought off. I was just watching on Western Journalism a great video with Trey Gowdy, but it sounds like Trey Gowdy is now falling into the background. He's saying that it's all going to the FBI. Of course, we know how the FBI does it nowadays.
Yeah, well, they covered up the murder of Vince Foster, and what the FBI may do is say, we've looked at the server, and we have found not a single shred of evidence to indict Hillary Clinton. And, of course, nobody's going to believe that because they waited so long to get their hands on the hardware. And, that's what the FBI does. The FBI covers up for the rulers, and they've been doing it all along. They were covering up over the fact that J. Edgar Hoover was gay, and all of that stuff. They're really not about crime prevention or crime control. In fact, even in the days of J. Edgar Hoover, it was all about gaining positive publicity. It reached such a ridiculous level that when they actually got John Dillinger, Hoover posed for a photo over Dillinger's body to make it look like he personally had gunned Dillinger down, and the guy who'd really got him, I think his name was Melvin Purvis, just got sidelined and transferred out. Go away, you're not supposed to make the boss look bad. So, that's the real nature of the FBI. I'm sorry, Jodie Foster, it was a cool movie about Silence of the Lamb, but no, the FBI are not like that at all.
Yeah, I was going to add to that Trey Gowdy said that everything that Clinton has stated or has said or sworn to like that has been patently false.
It is. It's absolutely provable lies here. And, Hillary's campaign, they're treating it like a law case. There's no proof, therefore you shouldn't think about it. But politics is perception, and Hillary's numbers show that. She's now trailing behind Bernie Sanders. She's trailing behind 4 of the GOP candidates in the polls right now. Her campaign is a train wreck. It really is. Good.
I think
good. All right, listen, Keith.
Go ahead.
Well, I got
to get that video that I sent?
Yeah, I did, and I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here. I'm looking at this very interesting story that's being run in the Los Angeles Times, which is pro-Hillary, and it is almost a classic setup sob story. Oh, the candidate responding to the crisis. And the backstory is they're talking about the guy, Carl Babbitt, who was sent to jail because he killed somebody while under the influence of illegal drugs, and then he shows up at the town hall meeting, very polite in front of Hillary, and says, you know, what are we going to do? I've been clean and sober for 15 years, can't find a full-time job because the background check says convicted felon. What would you suggest that we're going to do? In other words, it is definitely a setup so that Hillary can say, well, I feel we ought to, and launch into another issue to try and distract everybody away from the email scandal. And by the way, I think we should be a little more forgiving for people who have had a mistake in their youth, and they've shown that they're able to reform. After, you know, I would say let's be safe. After 5 years of clean living, let's make those past records locked away to give people a second chance. I want to live in a universe where there's the possibility of redemption. That being said, I don't think Hillary cares a darn about this guy. She's going to make drug abuse and drug offenses an issue of her campaign, and it's going to fizzle because every time she talks about drugs and drug abuse, everybody on the Internet is going to remember about Hillary and Bill's connection to that CIA gun and drug running operation at Mena, Arkansas, while Bill was governor, called Iran-Contra. They're out there thrashing around. Now, former President Jimmy Carter has revealed he has cancer. He's had it before. He had surgery, and he's going to have to undergo treatment and cut back his schedule at the Carter Center. And we all wish him well. I mean, I think, actually, to be very honest, Jimmy Carter is the only living American president I would actually like to meet. And I'm very sorry to hear that he's dealing with that issue. All right, skipping on down here. U.S. police have shot more than 600 Americans dead this year so far. Not sure if they were guilty of anything or not, but that's the body count. Apparently, there's a big scandal going on over in New York following the escape of these two criminals. Spectacular prison break. Apparently, the guards and warden at the state prison have been engaging in torture of the other prisoners, trying to find any information about how these people got out. And they're talking about ramming prisoners' heads against wall. They hanged one from a pipe with a plastic bag. They were threatening waterboarding. They actually threatened to kill some of these people. American prisons are starting to look more and more like the CIA's torture chambers at Abu Ghraib in Guantanamo Bay. It's now come out that the Chicago Police's secret torture center, more than 3,000 people were sent there to be tortured. Only 3 of them ever got lawyers. And apparently there's a big stink because apparently New York's Governor Cuomo was very much aware of what is being done in the prison to these prisoners here. Now, about 2 weeks ago, there was this story all over the Internet, was sent to me a bunch of times, which usually signals it's somebody's propaganda campaign, and it was about this National Guard soldier who claimed that he had been threatened by Muslims, that they were going to come over and do really bad things to him, they were going to tear tags off his couch cushions, and whatever. This National Guard soldier has now been arrested for filing a false report. The Cobb County Police investigated and determined that this National Guardsman just made it all up. It was a hoax. Feel sorry for me. The Muslims are evil. They're threatening the National Guard. And it was another hoax, another fraud. It's the way of the world these days. Now, speaking of hoax and fraud, you have probably seen it all over the news that the Dutch investigators looking into the crash of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 have determined it was a Russian Buk missile that shot the aircraft down. And apparently it's a misquote. The Dutch investigators have issued a statement yesterday saying, no, we did not say that. We said we found evidence of a weapon that might be a Buk, but there's nothing there that says who it belongs to, because both Ukraine and Russia have the Buk. The Buk was actually manufactured in Ukraine before all the unhappiness. And today they issued another clarification saying they said these metal pieces could be from a Buk, but they could also be from an air-to-air missile. And everybody is on board with this, we're going to make Russia look bad because we've got to have war with Russia because it's the only way to save the American banks. Now, remember what I said before about erasing America's sense of an identity? It's going overboard. Believe it or not, there was an op-ed in Newsweek saying that it's time to ban the POW MIA flag. It's, black and white. It's a flag that is flown in remembrance of all those POWs who were left behind in Vietnam. And this op-ed in Newsweek is saying it has to be banned. It is a symbol of racist hate. They can't even really explain why, but they're calling for its ban. I think this is John McCain. He wants this to go away. When he tried to use his star power against Donald Trump, it blew back in his face. Because everybody was talking about Songbird McCain, how he gave North Vietnam secrets. He was actually charged with treason upon his release. Nixon pardoned him. And McCain was at the center of the effort to cover up the POW scandal. Because the U.S. government just decided after the war was over, it's not worth all that money in reparations to get those few kids back. We'll just leave them there. It's going to cost us much less money to go on out and say that anybody who thinks there are still POWs in Vietnam is a tinfoil hat-wearing kook nutcase that no decent person should ever pay attention to. And McCain was right in the heart of that. And that got brought back up when he tried to use his star power against Trump. So all of a sudden, some buddy over in Newsweek pens an op-ed said, it's time to ban the POW MIA flag. It's a symbol of racist hate. And it's a bit of a stretch. It really is. But this is over in Newsweek. Now they want to ban the POW flag. They're trying to ban the Gadsden flag. They're trying to ban all the symbols of America's national identity. So they can pour in a bunch of immigrants from all around the world, and America will have just kind of disappeared. Confederacy? No idea what you're talking about. Old Man in the Mountain? No idea what you're talking about. Flags of this and no idea. America used to be around here somewhere. Maybe. I think. I'm not sure. All the landmarks and markers are now gone. It was around. It was here the last time I looked, but it's gone now. We're going to have the United States of Earth in its place. Won't that be so much better? We got a brand new global central bank. It really is nonsense. By the way, liberals are out there screaming that Band-Aids are racist because they come in white. Actually, I remember seeing Band-Aids that were sold in darker colors. They didn't sell very well. Because the black kids like to have a visible Band-Aid. It makes them look heroic and adventurous. See, I had a cut. I was doing something cool. It's just absurd out there. By the way, this season, the global warming fanatics have changed tactics. The last several winters they've been screaming about the drowning polar bears, those poor, suffering, drowning polar bears. And the polar bears didn't drown because they swim very well. They float even when asleep. And they have grown in population to the point where they're a pest. So now they've switched over to the walruses. Oh, those poor walruses with their cute little noses and the tusks, and they're running out of ice. They're going to drown this year. Because if at first you don't succeed, lie again. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back here on the Genesis Communication Network tomorrow. Please call all your local talk radio stations. Point them at gcnlive.com. Ask them to carry our programming. It is working. We are getting affiliates coming on board thanks to you, Rivero's Rangers. Have a good afternoon. Aloha, America.